Hello, everyone. I'm Yasmin Taj, editor at the Economic Times International HR and CIO, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to another power-packed session of Transformation Talks presented by ETHRWorld International. Transformation Talks is an exclusive live series where leaders from different industries and functions address some of the biggest challenges pertaining to the world of work. The need for building high-performing teams has become mission critical to a company's survival today, especially with so many shifts happening in the world of work as we speak. Right from navigating the global pandemic to handling the global recessionary pressures, the past few years have been an unprecedented challenge for every leader. What's come to their attention is the fact that building a high-performing team requires more than just pulling together a group of talented people with the right skills. It requires a careful assessment of the key traits, behaviors, and practices to build a winning team. It needs the right tools, framework, and conversations to uplift experiences and drive a performance-oriented work culture. To uncover a few big trends that will drive organizational performance in 2023 and beyond, and to decode the attribute of winning teams in future-led organizations, today we have with us Dr. Tim Baker, Managing Director at Winners at Work, executive coach, author, and consultant, who will share with us the secret recipe of building high-performing teams. Dr. Baker is a thought leader, international consultant, and successful author. He's the managing director of Winners at Work Pty Limited, which specializes in leadership development and performance. He was recently voted one of the most talented global training and development leaders by the World HRD Congress, which is awarded by a distinguished international panel of professionals who are doing extraordinary work in the field of HRD. Tim is also the author of 14 books, including his latest, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. So, Dr. Baker, thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you for this episode.
Absolute pleasure.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Introduction.
Great. And to all our audience who are joining this session live today, keep posting your reflections, views, and comments in the comment section. We will take all the questions at the end of the discussion if possible. So now, without any further ado, let me invite Dr. Baker, and here is the first question for you. How would you define winning teams? What are the characteristics of high-performing teams today, especially in an ever-shifting work landscape, Dr. Baker?
Yasmin, I've identified 8 characteristics of high-performing teams, and I get an opportunity to work with lots of teams in lots of different forums, both in the public sector, private sector, not-for-profit. There's not that many teams out there that would be classified as high-performing teams. So the question is, what makes the difference? What's the difference between, say, a mediocre and a high-performing team? And I've identified 8 characteristics, and I'll just run through them very quickly. And then if you want to talk about any of those, we can. I think building trust is critical. And I think you look at any high-performing team, they will tend to spend more time on the people dimension than the task dimension, but building trust is one. Another one is shared leadership. Not every decision in a team needs to be shared, but we do know from high-performing teams that in many decision-making processes, they get involved in the team process. So they ask people, they consult, and so forth. The third characteristic is being agile. Being agile, of course, is the new black. Everybody's talking about being agile, but I think it's critical in this time that we're living in, this world of accelerated uncertainty, is really around being agile. So there's 3. The fourth characteristic is creating purpose. All high-performing teams have a very clear purpose. So if you look in the sporting world, it's very obvious a team is supposed to win the tournament, win the competition, and so forth. But I think in a high-performing team in the workplace, there's so many different variables. They've got to be absolutely critically clear about what their purpose is. Managing stakeholders is critically important, and all high-performing teams do that extremely well. Managing stakeholders is, I think, one of the most underrated areas of high-performing teams. Improving systems, as in always looking at doing things better, faster, easier, safer. These high-performing teams are always asking the question, how can we do things better? They also manage diversity very well. And what I mean by that is not so much diversity in terms of race or ethnicity or gender, more around diversity of how people think. So in a high-performing team, we have blue sky thinkers, we have people who are detail-focused, we have extroverts, we have introverts. All of these characteristics, instead of annoying people, are actually used for the betterment of the team. So that's number 7. And the final one is learning continuously. That is always looking at opportunities to learn and grow and develop and become better. That, at the end of the day, you might say, well, why is there only 8? But to me, having done the research and studied sporting teams, worked in the corporate world, these are the 8 fundamental characteristics. The good news is, if you work on one of those characteristics, it's likely to impact positively on the other characteristics. So it's not an overwhelming task. Problem is, most organizations are too busy. They might do a half-day obligatory workshop at the beginning, and that's all done, and then it's on to the work. But in fact, high-performing teams never let go of the people dimension of work, and research shows that it's the people dimension that makes all the difference.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Baker. I think we have heard these qualities come out to other people also, maybe 2, some people talk about 2, some people talk about 4 of them, but you put together them very beautifully, all these 8 characteristics. Just a follow-up question to that. So do you think winning teams need to have all these characteristics, or can a few also do the difference, or are there some which are more important than the other, or do we need all 8?
I think essentially you should strive for all 8. And one of the things I do when I'm consulting is I actually ask the team to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5 on those 8. Wow. And then, of course, the lower scores, we say, well, what could you do about improving that dimension? If you ask me what was the most important, I would say there are 2. One is building trust. It's incredibly important and very elusive. It's easy to say, hard to do, because you've got so many dimensions, haven't you? You've got people relating to each other in the team, you've got people relating to their manager, you've got people relating to stakeholders. All of these things are to do with trust. The other one I think is critically important and highly underrated is purpose. Nice. I mean, if you sat down with a team and you ask them, what's your purpose? Not what do you do, but why do you exist? A high-performing team would be able to answer that question pretty well, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think I so agree with you. When I was going through these 8 qualities that you spoke of, even I feel that trust and purpose, they're going to be like the foundational qualities to start with, and then you can build up on the other ones. So thanks for sharing that, Dr. Baker. Moving on to the next question now. So in a constant drive to add technologies, fasten operations, improve efficiency, organizations often tend to overlook the human aspect of jobs that actually drives everything. So bringing back the human spirit is of critical importance in this rapidly growing business environment. What could be some of the best practices, according to you, that organizations can follow to humanize work and elevate experiences for the people?
I think humanizing work is a really important point. And I think that there's a number of things, practical things that people can do. First of all, understanding that there's a task to be achieved and there's relationships to be maintained. And I would say that my first practical tip is to spend more time on the relationship dimension. I think that's really, really important. And how you might do that, for example, is for the team leader to have regular check-ins with each team member once a month. This is important just to keep in touch. Colleagues of mine in the United States who wrote a wonderful book, Credibility, Kuzner and Posner, said that leadership is a relationship. And I think they're 100% right. So really, it's not obviously a personal relationship, but it's a working relationship. And team members can't do anything without a good working relationship with their team members. People will do things because they're told, but it won't be sustainable, and that's critically important. So one-on-one catch-ups. So any of our listeners who aren't doing that, I would strongly encourage you to invest in that. These need only be 20 minutes once a month, and these are performance and development type conversations, not just the work that's being done, because that's being discussed anyway. I think the other practical thing that people can do, Yasmin, is make their meetings a bit more interesting. I mean, how often have we attended a really good meeting? I mean, it's so rare, isn't it? And it just bugs me because I think there's so much opportunity there, because to me, the ideal meeting of a team, or anyone for that matter, is 50% reporting and 50% discussion and dialogue. I think the reporting part gets overdone and the dialogue part is underdone. So having people engaged in conversations around the table makes a huge difference. And I think that humanizes work in so many ways.
I think, thanks, Dr. Baker. Very interesting thoughts when everyone around us is talking about how important empathy is. When you said that leadership is all about, it is a relationship, I think it really makes a lot of sense. And building that kind of a personal connect with your people, no matter what kind of organization structure you are, if you could build that connect, that kind of a relationship with your people, I think that sets the tone for organizations who are creating better experiences for their people. So great thoughts. Thanks for sharing that. So Dr. Baker, in your conversation, in one of your books, actually, you've also talked about how you can standardize the performance review process with the 5 conversations framework. We'd love to understand a little more about a standard review framework from you. What really makes these conversations productive and insightful for both managers and employees? If you could tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I wrote this book, the end of the performance review, in 2013, and I wrote it because there was no evidence that I could find anywhere at all where performance reviews actually increase performance. So my question is, why do we do them? And what the 5 conversations framework was all about was to replace that performance review, and many companies around the world are doing that, and that's great. Some, of course, can't let go of that, and because they can't let go of that, they need an enabler to improve the quality of conversation leading up to the review. And that's where the 5 conversations framework can fit in. 5 conversations framework basically is 20-minute conversations once a month over a 5-month period. And so let me just give you a sense of what those conversations might look like. The very first conversation is a climate review conversation. Now, it's got nothing to do with the weather, of course, but everything to do with how people are feeling at work, how they're engaging, and so forth. So the very first question you ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, it doesn't matter what they give you. They might say 6. Then it opens up an opportunity to have a dialogue about why it's 6. How could it be 7? What could I do to assist? What do you need to do? So that's the first conversation. All over the world, I dare say your country, all over the world, organizations spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these online engagement surveys. And everybody gets very cynical about them. And every year the participation rate drops. The reason it drops is simply that people get very cynical and think that nothing's going to change. We never see the results. We don't know why they're being done, and so forth and so on. My argument is, why don't we just talk about those things? Why do we have to do them online? And if people say to me, well, people are more likely to be honest online, I'd say, well, that's a problem that you've got between you and the leader. So the second conversation is strengths and talents. Instead of starting with what people are not good at, how about we start at what people are good at? And so the question there, instead, if you said to someone, what's your strength? They're likely to look at you in a very strange way, and it wouldn't matter what culture we're talking about. But if you said to somebody, what's the one thing that you enjoy most about the work that you do? They'll be able to tell you something. And not only that, we do know from research there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what people are good at. So what I've actually done by asking that question is unearthed what it is that people really enjoy and perhaps have an innate talent towards. And it's based on the 3P principle. We tend to practice what we prefer, and we ultimately become proficient in it. So that's the second conversation. Then there's the opportunities for growth conversation, which is around people coming to that meeting, that conversation, with an area for growth over the next 6 months. So I suggest that people actually are prepped up on this. They're asked to bring that to the meeting, and then it's discussed. The fourth conversation is a learning and development conversation, and that is really about the bringing together the bits and pieces from the previous 2 conversations. So therefore, it might be, I can build on this strength by doing this course, or I can learn this by doing that. Again, organizations spend lots of time doing training needs analyses. And again, why isn't it just a case of having a conversation on a once or twice a year basis to work that out? It just seems to me very logical that that happen. And the final conversation is innovation and continuous improvement. And that's about how we can improve the working environment that we're in. So again, people come to that conversation having thought about that. So they're not just sitting there and then someone says, what's your idea? And they're looking at you blankly. They've already thought about it. So I guess there's preparation here, both from the person asking the questions, but also for the person that's going to be responding. That in a nutshell, Yasmin, is the 5 conversations framework. And I have to say it's working extremely well.
I think that's one of the most interesting ways of doing a performance conversation I've heard, Dr. Baker. I think a lot of organizations have still not got it right. They look at yearly reviews or maybe biannual reviews or quarterly reviews, but even then the whole construct of the conversation is never worked upon. But as you said, if we can follow these 5 steps and start by looking at strengths first, start by understanding what's working for them first, and helping them prepare and come together and figure out what's working, what's not, and focus more on the strengths. As you said, I think these kind of conversations can always lead to better performance feedback. And thanks for sharing that. Very, very interesting there. So Dr. Baker, in other conversations with many HR leaders over recent years, what have been some of the most emerging challenges in the HR space, and how are they looking at resolving them?
Yeah, look, I think the big one at the moment is hybrid working environment. I think all over the world, people are trying to sort of bring their people back to work. But the bigger question is not how do we get people back to work? The bigger question is why don't people want to come back to work? So, HR is grappling with this because a lot of pressure is put on them to bring the people into the work. But I would say that hybrid working arrangements is here to stay. We've just got to accept the reality of it. I actually think it's one of the biggest changes fundamentally since the Industrial Revolution. I don't think we quite realize it yet, but it's a significant shift, not just in the fact that people are working from home, but because systems, processes, and procedures are probably not geared towards hybrid working arrangements. That's the biggest challenge for HR, is to get on board and make sure their systems and processes are working effectively. Another one is artificial intelligence. Obviously, it's affecting everything. And I think in the past, there's been a paradigm of competition with AI. That is, is AI going to take my job? So there's this sort of rivalry and competitiveness between employees and AI. I think we've got to stop that and start thinking about collaboration and just accept the fact that it's here to stay. It's not going away. And the question then is, how do we merge human beings and artificial intelligence in a way that creates what we might call super teams? Super teams are teams that can actually coordinate both the artificial intelligence, digital capabilities with the people capabilities. So that's another big challenge. The third challenge, I think, and it's still with us, is engagement levels. All over the world, they're low. I mean, they go, 70%? And that's frightening, really, isn't it, to think that 70% of people are disengaged at work. What's probably more frightening is that 20% of those 70 are actively disengaged. That is, they're trying to actually undermine what's going on. I think there's no great... my personal view about this is bringing the human being back to work is the key. I honestly think that if leaders can develop conversational leadership skills, this can make a massive difference to retain and attract good quality people. It's not that difficult when we think about it. It's difficult for some leaders to do it, undoubtedly, but really the answer, I don't think, is in free massages and all of these crazy things that we all do. They're all nice, but at the end of the day, as I said earlier, leadership is a relationship. At the end of the answer, and how does one have a relationship with anybody? There's only one answer to that: one conversation at a time. You can't do it via text, not really, nor email. nor any other technology. It means people sitting and talking with each other, meaningful conversations, nevertheless. And so I think that really is the answer to building engagement levels up. So I think those three are the key issues we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's you said it really well, because most organizations that we speak to a lot of leaders, and these are the core problems that they're dealing with. Firstly, though hybrid is a reality, how to manage that workforce when you're working in a hybrid setup is a challenge. And as I said, one of the biggest challenges here is about how do you create that experience? How do you keep your people engaged and motivated, help them find that purpose that they want in order to stick to your organization? I think these are very key challenges HR leaders, not just HR leaders, I believe even business leaders who have a focus on their people today are facing. And I think that's where we need to focus on going forward. So thanks for sharing that, Dr. Baker. You just said that how employee engagement is of such critical importance for organizations, Dr. Baker, and not to mention how disengagement actually costs organizations money. So what kind of leadership, and you have kind of alluded towards it also, what kind of leadership do we think is needed to drive this engagement factor, bring back the human factor to work? And what would be your suggestion for our HR and business leaders?
I think the first suggestion would be to invest in making sure that every leader is having these regular catch-ups with their team members. Yeah. And I think it's fascinating that in 2023, if you and I went to a workshop and we were learning about having conversations, imagine if our parents were alive today and we went and we rang our parents up at the end of the workshop and said, guess what, Mum and Dad, I've just learned about having conversations. They would think that was the funniest thing they've ever heard in their life. This is why it's quite interesting. So I think we actually learn by doing, and I think, you know, actually getting people engaged in something like the 5 Conversations framework will make a significant difference. That will help. I think another thing is, I think, and Daniel Pink talked about this in his book Drive. He talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Most people in the knowledge worker could be classified as knowledge workers. And really, there's 3 things that they want. They want autonomy. They want to be able to decide how to do their own work. They certainly don't want to be micromanaged. So there's definitely needs to be getting that balance absolutely right. Mastery is about growing and developing and improving your capabilities within and beyond that role. And I think purpose is always about, why are we doing this? What is the critical thing here that's important? And leaders should be in the business of selling a purpose all the time so that people actually understand why they're doing something. I think a lot of managers assume that their team members actually understand the purpose, but the research doesn't demonstrate that at all. So I think a little more of that wouldn't go astray. I think more feedback. There is research to show that feedback and engagement levels are correlated. So in other words, the more feedback someone gives, the more likely they are to engage their team members. That's a critical factor. And I think those things make a big, big difference. But really, it's about just developing that relationship and making sure that it's a productive working relationship where expectations are clear and that people enjoy interacting with their leader. I think that's the key point.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. If you have that connect, that personal relationship, if you listen to your employees, if I may say, the first thing is to, develop that listening skill where you understand what is it that they need, what are their expectations, what are they looking forward to, and then you build that trust and work towards building that relationship, making it stronger, connecting with them regularly. I think if leaders could learn these few things, but Dr. Baker, why do you think leaders still don't manage to do that pretty well?
I think because they've been promoted into their role because of their technical capabilities. A good engineer will make a good leader of engineers, not necessarily, as we know. And I think this is the problem. And so we're recruiting people based on their technical capabilities, not recruiting people on their interpersonal capabilities. Exactly. That's got to change. That's got to change quickly, because at the end of, everybody would, not everybody, but a lot of people would want to be a leader, but they probably want to be a leader for the wrong reasons. They probably want to be a leader for the extra pay and all the rest of it. That's fine. But at the end of the day, I think leadership is a privileged position, and people have got to learn a whole new skill set. Just because you're a good engineer doesn't mean you're good at managing other people doing engineering jobs as such. So I think it's really important.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I think, yes, I think it's as important to be good at human skills and connecting with people as you can with your technical skills and expertise. I think thanks for sharing that, Dr. Baker. Thanks for that. Now we're moving on to a quick round of rapid fire questions for you. We'll ask you questions for just maybe a one-line answer. So the first question to that would be, what will be the 3 big trends that will drive organizational performance in 2023, according to you?
I think adaptability would be definitely one. Yeah. The notion of attracting and retaining talent, and that will always be, everyone's looking for star performers, and adjusting to COVID. And after COVID, I still think there are a lot of organizations that are having difficulty making this adjustment that's necessary. And I think they're not reading the tea leaves as well as they could. But to me, they're the 3.
Great, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. The next question is 2 words that define the future of work for you.
Well, I had to think about this. I actually think transformative would be one word, because the world of work is clearly in a transformative stage. I mean, think about what it was like 10 years ago compared with today. And the other one is employee-centered. I think organizations have got to become far more employee-centered. And I think those 2 are critical.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks for sharing that. And the final question now, according to you, the top 3 skills that every employee must master to thrive in this hyper-competitive and dynamic world of operations today?
Yeah, look, if I was giving advice, and I do regularly, I'd say continually grow and develop. I think anyone that thinks they've learned it all is probably on a downward slide. I think it's really important. Secondly, I think practicing mindfulness and resilience, being in the moment, and also being able to handle some of the inevitable shocks that'll come your way in your career. And I think the third one is highly underrated, is networking. No. You know, the old adage of it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think that's really incredibly important. And these days, of course, you've got technology to help you with that.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Dr. Baker. Some very interesting insights. On that note, that was all the time we had for this episode, but I think it was a very, very insightful conversation. So thank you, Dr. Baker. I think we've learned a lot from you today about how we can focus on creating those winning teams by focusing a lot more on becoming more employee-centered, more human, focusing on leadership, focusing on building trust, listening to your people, creating purpose for your people. I think those 8 qualities that you've started off with, that you mentioned in the beginning, those can really help people build those kind of high-performing teams and also create employee experiences that really matter. So I think in a world which is changing on a daily basis, if leadership and if organizations can focus on these, that will take them a long way in becoming more future ready and becoming better organizations. So thank you so much. Those were some great insights, Dr. Baker.
Thank you, Yasmin. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. And for all our audience members, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great pleasure hosting you all. Please stay tuned for the next episode of Transformation Talks. Until then, take care and bye-bye.